can you keep a secret?
Changing hearts and minds.
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 Welcome to Change Your POV podcast. You're listening to Changing Hearts and Minds, a show about reviving the warrior spirit and remembering the past to improve our future. I'm your host, Jeff Adamick. Let's get this party started.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I totally screwed or what? You're funny.
I want to discuss all this behavior.
Let me out of here!
Hey guys, I know the last couple weeks you've been coming up on Wednesdays looking for Jeff and Changing Hearts and Minds, and you may or may not have been finding me there. Well guys, I haven't gone anywhere. I'm just wanting to jump in here real quick to remind you all that I've been working on a special project for Change Your POV Podcast Network and Changing Hearts and Minds. This January, we are going to be releasing a multi-part event all at once called Lessons in Leadership Band of Brothers. I will have some shows still being released in between, and once that show is released, we will be back on to our once-a-week Changing Hearts and Minds episodes. But I welcome you guys to go out there and check out the Lessons in Leadership Band of Brothers Facebook page, which can be linked through the Changing Hearts and Minds Facebook page or by searching Lessons in Leadership Band of Brothers on Facebook and finding it. It's a closed group, so go ahead and ask for access and become a member of the group if you want to. Inside of it, you're going to see all the different things that we're planning to put together for this project that we're coming out with. All the different people who are going to be participating in the project. It's going to be a big deal, guys. We're real excited about it, and we think you're going to really love it. So, in the meanwhile, here is your regular Changing Hearts and Minds episode.
Good afternoon. I'm Charles Gibson at ABC News headquarters in New York. We have only preliminary information and sketchy details, but there has been a tragic shooting incident today at Fort Hood in Texas. Fort Hood, about halfway between Austin and Waco, the largest U.S. military installation in the world. It's a shooting incident. We understand shooter or shooters, and we understand there probably were two, have killed 7 people on the base and wounded 12.
Just wanted to update our breaking news out of Texas because 3 bodies, body of a man and 2 small children, were found in a home at the Fort Hood Army base. Investigators are not releasing a lot of information at this point in time, but they do say there is no more threat. Again, bodies found at this Fort Hood Army base at this location. Working to get more information. Stay tuned to CNN for that.
9 years now on a war footing, the American military is seeing an alarming spike in suicides among service personnel. Last year, for the first time ever, Army suicides surpassed the ratio of civilian suicides, and the numbers keep climbing. In fact, 14 suicides and 6 more suspected suicides have been reported so far this year among soldiers stationed at Fort Hood. New at 6, KXAN's David Scott reports Fort Hood in Killeen is sadly leading the way with 4 new deaths in just the past week.
I really don't know. I wish that I did. I don't think there is a simple answer.
The Army is at a loss to explain the rash of suicides, although it acknowledges military life is subject to all manner of stress, including danger and family separation. Some believe extended and repeated deployments could be a factor, but 80% of Army suicides have had 1 or no deployments.
I think deployments are one of the stressors on soldiers and their family members, among many others. Stresses on relationship issues, financial issues, and so I think that there's a whole host of stressors that are on all of us, and then deployments being one of them.
Since the war with Iraq began in 2003, Fort Hood has led all American military installations in the number of suicides, more than 100 in 7 years and counting.
Thank you. Also breaking this midday, a soldier from Avon who had gone missing from Fort Hood in Texas has been found dead.
Thank you, Jackie. And a shooting outside a Texas convenience store has claimed the life of a soldier from Wyoming County. News 4's George Rickard is in the newsroom now with the story new tonight at 6.
That's right, Don. This is a 25-year-old Letchworth Central High School graduate who served 2 tours of duty overseas and was murdered last week in Texas. He is Army Specialist Austin Sampson, who grew up in the Wyoming County town of Bliss and who last Wednesday evening was one of 3 men shot outside of a convenience store in Killeen, Texas.
All these news reports are of violent loss of life. Albeit not all the same, these reports range from active shooter to murder-suicide, missing and later found dead, and the skyrocketing suicide rate. They all have one thing in common though: Fort Hood, Texas. And beyond that, they are part of something that may be more than just a circumstantial rise in the death toll. It could be a systemic issue that is being ignored or mistaken for a darker issue. Today on Changing Hearts and Minds, we take a look at the epidemic at Fort Hood. What if suicide as a cause of death is being too liberally applied to a rising murder rate, concealing an issue that is being overlooked? Changing Hearts and Minds welcomes Jennifer Norris to this episode in search of justice.
Guys, today on Changing Hearts and Minds, I almost said on Band of Brothers because I'm doing both of these shows at the same time right now, and so I've got Band of Brothers on my mind, Changing Hearts and Minds on my mind. This was a hard interview to jump to because I'm spending so much time focusing on the history stuff for that one group of episodes, but I still have my episodes that I have to release every month, and this is one that I've been trying to get for a while. And finally, my guest, Jennifer Norris, finally came back from Washington and didn't keep putting me off for bigger and better people in Washington to pay attention to her. But she is my guest today. Jennifer Norris is a military justice policy analyst. She holds an MA in Public Policy and Management from the Muskie School of Public Service and a BA in Social Work and Criminal Justice from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. She served in the United States Air Force, worked as a satellite communications maintenance technician with 2 mobile combat communication squadrons before becoming an emergency manager for a civil engineer squadron. She was involuntarily retired in 2010 after 15 years of service due to a PTSD diagnosis. Hey, funny story. I was 2013. I was done. The same thing happened to me. Given her unique experience working in a mentally and physically demanding male-dominated career field and a marriage to a fellow service member, Jennifer draws on their experiences to make positive changes for all service members. Jennifer has dedicated her life to analyzing the legal issues that negatively impact service members and their families in an effort to strengthen the due process, protections, and save lives. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We have to pretend like we haven't been talking for almost an hour, and the phone calls, like everybody that comes on the show, I've got to pretend like it's the first moment, and it's fun. It's fun. Gives me a little bit of a chance to live outside my own life. But all right, so the reason why I wanted to read that entire entry that you have on there is because I think that if we just dove right into it, we run the risk of making people think we're running a conspiracy theory episode right now. And guys, I am not kidding you when I say that there is no conspiracy theory about what we're going to be talking about. We're trying to bring light to it. It's something that is really happening. It's not conspiracy. This is real. And also, when you really think about it, the conspiracy theory only applies to it because it's something that's not out in the open. But if you just think about what we're saying, we're not saying that aliens are off doing weird things. We're not saying the government's covering something up. This is something that's just being slipped through the cracks and not focused on. And so, without further ado, I am going to let Jennifer go ahead and tell you what it is that she is working on with the government right now, actively, to try to bring some light to. Jennifer?
Well, I guess you could say that it started with how I was released from service back in the 2012 time range. And because I felt that it was unfair that I should be released from service because of a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, caused by somebody else, actually, because I was a victim of crime while serving, I decided I was going to go to D.C. and speak with my senators about how it just felt like an injustice. And that had I never told them I had PTSD, they never would have known.
Right.
But unfortunately got bounced as soon as they found out. And that's what drove the passion for me to do what I do today. My initial fight started out as one that was focused on sexual assault and rape. But as you can see from my degree in public policy and management, I have a bigger picture type thinking mentality, and I like to look at all the issues that are, kind of brewing in the pot to see what's really going on big picture so we can address it as a totality of the circumstances. So it is this passion that led me to start doing research to find out what's actually happening in the ranks. And this was after I learned that I thought I was just an unusual circumstance where I just happened to have some bad luck and happen to just be at the wrong place at the wrong time and have this happen to me and then cause post-traumatic stress later on down the road. But when I came forward and went public with my story, I learned that there were many stories that were like mine. And like the research I've been doing, I noticed the same patterns and same abuses and same tragedies occurring over and over. So as a result of doing the research to see what was going on in the military, I found that we had more than one issue, the rape and sexual assault issue. We had co-occurring issues to include, some domestic violence, some post-traumatic stress that goes untreated, some bad conduct discharge issues that were unwarranted, with soldiers that risked their lives overseas, and now because they might have got angry and punched someone, they're no longer eligible for VA mental health services.
Wait. I'm sorry. Can you go back? Can you say that again? I need to hear that a second time. Are you saying that there's been people who have, because of their PTSD, have lost physical control, hit someone, and then lost their VA benefits because they resorted to violence when they're not mentally stable?
What we see happen is because the post-traumatic stress is not getting treated, they stay in hypervigilance mode.
Right. Okay.
And so they do things they wouldn't have necessarily done if they weren't in a defensive state of mind with this hypervigilance.
But also, would they have been kicked out if they were diagnosed with PTSD? Or would they have been treated differently because they obviously knew they had PTSD? I think that when they have the opportunity to get rid of guys and they haven't been diagnosed, now they don't want to diagnose them. They just want to get rid of them. Because then they have to treat the problem. If they want you to tell everyone what your problem is, but until you're a problem to them, and then they want you to just go away.
Yes, unfortunately, that appears to be the pattern, and when they bounce them like that and they don't compassionately transfer them over to the Department of Veteran Affairs, we're seeing PTSD meltdowns left and right. And so basically they're tossed out in a downward spiral because they don't even really know how to reach out for the help that they need, because they don't even really know what's going on. They're just trying to cope with whatever's happening, and they may have just lost their career over a bad decision and now can't go to the Department of Veteran Affairs and get help.
And it may not even be a bad decision. I mean, I got medically retired for being injured in combat, and there was no bad decision that you know what I mean? So it's you compound a significant emotional event by having your brain chemistry altered through injury or activity. And then you compound that with another significant emotional event of separating someone from service. I mean, I'm not saying that we should keep everyone in. I'm saying that for me, I was getting out was the right answer. But we have got to do a better job of taking care of the guys. We can't have guys going into schools in Texas or into churches in Texas killing everyone and come to find out that they were being treated for mental health issues in the Air Force and then just got let go and thrown to the wolves.
Yes, exactly.
It's not the Air Force's fault he killed those people, but they're definitely responsible for failure to keep him inside some kind of a mental health system or at least aware to people of his condition.
Yes, Jeff, and I want to talk about that as part of when we let people go, how we let them go. Don't just send them through a transition assistance program that's going to talk about employment. We need a real transition assistance program that compassionately transfers them over for care if we find out that they have post-traumatic stress, or if they made a bad decision that was a result of an undiagnosed post-traumatic stress issue or some other mental health issue, because sometimes we learn in service that some of them may have other mental illnesses. And it's not fair of us to be like, oh, yes, let's just use the Army, for example. We, the Army, know this person has schizophrenia. We're going to cut them loose. And then they just downward spiral because they need help to manage that schizophrenia and they don't necessarily know better. I'm just using that as an example.
Now, I know this gets into the medical thing, but since you're like me, you have a lot of experiences, so I'm going to ask because I have a theory about this. Isn't the acute phases of PTSD breaks similar to schizophrenic reactions?
Yes.
So can we not be maybe misdiagnosing guys one way and both ways with PTSD or with schizophrenia? And is it true or not true that both different treatments are detrimental to the other? Like the treatment for schizophrenia does damage to PTSD victims. PTSD victims who take schizophrenia medicine are given a false sense of being fixed, and then when they go off it, end up having another break. So there's all kinds of stuff that's going on here, and I think we're relying too much on guys seeking help. I'm not saying that we should tell guys to get help, but a person with a mental illness or a mental health condition is not in the right state of mind. I mean, that is the definition of what's going on. So why are we putting it on them to seek help? If you see as a commander or as a NCO a person who is not normal and is obviously affected and changed, it is your responsibility as the leader of that person to get them to help. And as the medics and the doctors in the medical field, it is your responsibility to diagnose things that people cannot diagnose themselves. They may not get better till they admit they have it, but they'll be diagnosed and they'll be taken care of. They won't be walking around in a manic state and everyone ignoring what's going on, because it's easier to do that than to try to destroy someone's career. If everyone was just treat the problems, we wouldn't be worried about destroying careers. We wouldn't have so many people dead.
Yes, and we'd be able to protect our investment in some cases, because if you catch the post-traumatic stress in the very acute stages and treat them even with just education about what's going on with them so they don't feel like they're insane and they're validated, we can protect our investment, because they're not bad soldiers. They just need to be able to feel safe to go get the help they need to really improve their relationships with their significant others so that it doesn't bleed into their career. I
can say with all honesty that all I needed because I had a break. I thought I was going insane, but it was PTSD. Yes. All I needed was the support to tell me that there was a way for me to get better and that they were behind me. And I didn't need to be bullshitted, and I didn't need to be treated any differently. I just needed to be supported. And that, I know everyone's different, but I'm sure there's a lot of guys who just don't want to be treated different. Okay, I got this. Things are happening. Just don't treat me different.
Yeah.
Because I don't, other than being batshit crazy, I don't feel different. But the batshit crazy went away, came back to being normal again, and then it was right back to, why don't we get you deployed overseas? And I'm like, no, you guys, did you not read anything about how you treat PTSD? You do not take someone who is getting over an addiction to cortisol and put them back into an experience where they're going to have their cortisol levels. That's like giving heroin to a heroin junkie when they're doing withdrawals because you want them to feel better.
Well said. You couldn't have said that any better, and that's where our biggest concerns are, is sending them back over once we already know that they're already in that hypervigilant stage. And you're right, it's just like giving them...
Because they feel better over there. So we give them what they want, which is we know it's not a right state of mind. There's no way war could be better than home. So when you start talking that I need to get over there to feel better, that should be when we start taking care of these guys.
Yes, and unfortunately in the research I'm seeing is that because they keep going back over and over and over, they too reach a breaking point, and unfortunately their breaking points can be, catastrophic depending on what goes down. Right. We've got suicide, we've got murder-suicide. Again, it all kind of ties back to their significant others and family. It's not necessarily bleeding in the military until something happens and an outsider gets involved, and then it has to be reported to the chain of command. And then sometimes your post-traumatic stress will look like domestic violence when it's really not, but then they're going to take it down that road of domestic violence instead of looking at the totality of the circumstances and seeing, well, this guy deployed 3 or 4 times. He keeps having meltdowns. That's
that he wasn't having before he started deploying.
Yes.
So I always tell people, and I'm going to say it here on the show for the first time because I want everyone to get this through their heads. If you've never had PTSD, if you've never had a quote-unquote break with reality, which is not everyone that has PTSD has to break with realities. I had the opportunity to go through a couple days where I did. And I'm telling you, when you have relied your entire life on a brain that works fine and has never betrayed you, and what I mean is hearing and seeing things that are not there. This is not something that comes from you being crazy. It comes from chemicals in your brain telling you that they're there. And your brain has never lied to you your whole life. You've always relied on it. Now all of a sudden your brain is sending you messages and it's lying to you. Not intentionally because it's ill. But you cannot, I'm telling you, you cannot tell the difference. And you know it's not right, whatever's going on, because that's not what's happening. But that's where the insanity comes in, is when you start to have a contradiction between what you know is supposed to be going on and what your senses are telling you is going on. Because you really do believe these things are, you hear voices, you see things, it's insane. And when you have that happen to you for the first time and never had it happen before, it is scary.
It is very scary. I had it happen to me too, with the paranoia and everything with around my break time. And I think mine was unfortunately gaslighted by the way the chain of command was handling the situation. I felt like there was a stigma around what I was experiencing, that I couldn't be trusted with a gun, or I couldn't be trusted in general, when in fact it was nothing like that. It was that I had lost my confidentiality again, and my mind started spinning with who knows what, and are they going to think differently of me, and why does this feel like there's a stigma attached to it, and why are you treating me differently when the day before and you didn't know that I had PTSD? You wouldn't even have known I had it.
They walk on eggshells. They walk on eggshells around you. And Jennifer, the answer is because there is a stigma attached to it, and they are treating you differently than they treated you the day before. And here's the thing, I'm all right with that. When you find out someone has a terminal illness, you are going to act differently around them. You know, when a grandparent or a parent, God forbid, gets cancer and they're going to die, you are going to act differently around them. So, but what you don't realize with PTSD is this isn't coming from a loss and a feeling of fear. This is coming from a feeling of fear of the reality, because we're all in the military. We can all end up just like these guys, as many you see. We're really just afraid to come to grips with something that we know is right around the corner from us. Or we one of those guys that said it only happens to cowards. And then we get it, and we realize that we're not afraid, we're just crazy. And it's not cowardly. It has nothing to do with that. And then you get guilt, and you don't want to tell anyone. You know, there's all kinds of compound stuff. But I think that it's good to know that you got out and you found purpose, and you didn't go down a road of a lot of guys getting out, which unfortunately too many are nowadays. Getting out, thinking they're good. We all think they're good, and then, you know, breaking contact with him. He doesn't reach out when something, or she doesn't reach out when something bad's going on, and then they end up being on another news program, self-inflicted. Now, that leads me into my next thing this is where we're going to get into the conspiracy, guys, because if you think that was conspiracy, that's not. That was real. Everyone knows that shit. What if the numbers of all the suicides that are happening may not be accurate? And I'm not saying that we're saying people aren't committing suicide or people aren't dying. But if you have out as a investigative authority to not steamroll and pile on your already problems with mental illness and, you know, being a post-war army and all that kind of stuff, you just don't want to pile on with more stuff going on. If you could avoid making clear that something else is going on that's causing people to be hurt or die, and you can write it off as suicide, yeah, that's what I'm saying, guys. I'm saying that there is a chance that suicides are being mislabeled as suicides when they weren't. They were actually murders. And before you change the channel and say, all right, conspiracy theorists, all right, Alex Jones, I'm not Alex Jones. We are going to tell you exactly what we're talking about, and it's going to make sense when we're done. Go ahead, Jennifer, tell me about what it is that's happening at Fort Hood that is so alarming.
Well, first of all, it was last November 2016 that we noticed a cluster of deaths all in 1 month. And it really, I already try to track real time what's going on in the military, so I won't have people call me a conspiracy theorist, because I work with data and numbers I not only want to bring that together, but I want to bring faces to the names because these are real people that are being impacted by some of these issues. What we noticed at Fort Hood was after we started compiling the data, I've gone back years and they've had problems for years, but I've specifically been looking at recent because we've heard from Congress and others in the past, oh, well, that's how we did it in the past.
Well, so before we go too far into it, let's back up a little bit so we can make sure everyone. What was it about the cluster of what got you looking at it? Because to me, it's like if someone told me a cluster of these guys got killed, I'd be like, or committed suicide. I don't know where I love to hear how you were able to determine that there was a failure in investigation and that suicides were maybe not suicides and that they were failing to properly investigate and possibly just throwing a moniker on something because it's easier to do that.
Well, what really got our attention was one specific case where they went missing, and so it brought to light the whole AWOL issue and whether we should be calling it AWOL or whether we should be actually calling them missing soldiers like they would in the civilian world.
And guys, just so you know, we are beating around the bush and dancing around some of these cases. Obviously, that is intentional. Some of these cases are still active and they're still being investigated. And we don't want to give out names. We don't want to derail an investigation. So if it seems like we're dancing around and not giving out stuff, that's because we're dancing around and not giving out stuff. But go ahead, Jen. I just want to make sure they don't think we're just making stuff up as we go along.
Thank you, Jeff, because I am going to have to leave details out in order to protect the integrity of any current investigation or maybe even future investigation. So what really got our attention was first the missing warrior issue. And so I started compiling the data and we put it all together in one post called Army Soldiers at Fort Hood in Texas are dying at alarming rates stateside. This particular data is only from January 2016. But we have included the rest on another post called Violent Crime, Suicide, and Non-Combat Death at Fort Hood. We just want to make sure people know we didn't forget about them. But what we found was once we did the post and we put all the names, we came up with, just since January 2016, 72 deaths at Fort Hood. 4 of them were insider attacks in Afghanistan. The other 2 were suicides, one in Iraq, one in Korea. The one in Korea we're going to need to talk about because that particular suicide, that soldier had already come on the radar because he was another one of our missing soldiers that went AWOL, and they suspected it was because of mental health concerns.
Now, just before we go in, because I'm just trying to keep ahead of my audience here. You said insider attacks in Afghanistan. So are we talking about Fort Hood-based units, and that's where the incident happened was forward?
Yes, I'm including anything overseas as well because it all ties into the big picture.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're not going to have an accurate metric if you're not including everything, because that way you can't exclude what is combat related.
Exactly.
And that will get into the one girl we will say by name that we are going to mention because I'm hot on that case.
Yes. So we do have 3 suspected homicides, ones that they actually have considered a homicide, and then we have 13 cases where the soldier was found dead on post and 22 cases where the soldier was found dead off post. And when we looked at those numbers, we saw that some of it could definitely be combat related and, turn into a suicide, but others weren't quite so clear based on autopsies and, a forensic look at how they died.
Well, I don't know if you have the information right there in front of you, but it's beyond forensic. I mean, some of it is just blatantly not what it looked like. If you have any examples, give us an example of something that was written off as a suicide, but you can actually just tell us right now what the scene looked like, and it was obviously not a suicide.
Okay, the one case that I haven't given permission to talk about because we would really like to see it looked into further is Paige Briles. And the reason her case is important is because initially it was ruled a homicide.
Right.
But over the course of the investigation, the parents shared with me that they felt like the investigators were trying to convince them that it was actually a suicide when they knew, because the mom's in a medical field, that there was no way possible this could have been a suicide based on the manner of death.
And what was the manner of death? Is this the one in the car? Is this the car one where she was in the car and?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So it's to me, is this stuff able to be looked up online and researched?
No, that's the problem.
Okay.
We didn't even realize that there was a problem with them suspecting that the suicides were homicides until we did this post and parents started commenting on it.
Right.
We had multiple parents come on there and say, my kid did not commit suicide.
And guys, we know that every single parent out there, every single spouse is going to say the same thing. That's taken into account when they're doing this stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're not saying that we have to just hear what they have to say. They're in denial. They go through the stages of death just like everyone else. The bottom line is, though, when the scene itself, forensically, when a person who is not a military investigator looks at it and says, foul play, there's murder here, or at least we should look at it, it's almost implied. You have to give it because suicide is I mean, I don't know how the families feel. It's horrible either way. But I think I'd rather know that somebody died of murder than died of suicide. And just to have it written off as suicide, to me, kind of pisses me off. And it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't really get us the help we need in these places, especially if there's something else criminally going on around these places, these posts. So
right. This is supposed person who committed the homicides walking freely, not being held accountable, while the parents are sitting over there or the spouses are sitting at home depressed and traumatized that they can't get a straight answer.
And not
to make
just
sense.
and while the soldier himself or herself is thrown into a panic of thrown into the names of all the other suicides that is happening right now and just written off as somebody that's just another person that committed suicide. And that shouldn't happen either, but that's what's happening because it's getting too many of them are out there, and the names start getting blurry, and you're not giving the person what they're owed by the investigation and by the scene and by just, even if it's obviously suicide. I wish I could tell cops all the time, just take a look at it. Because the second you say suicide, we both know this is what happens. We both know about criminal investigations. Guys, the second that they say it's suicide, the investigation ends. If a beat cop shows up on scene, and the good example of this is the Kurt Cobain incident. He was considered dead and called a suicide death on the scene by the first cop who was a patrolman. So guess what the rest of the cops did when they got there? Nothing, because there's nothing they could do. There was no investigation. Whether or not he was killed or committed suicide, we'll never know for sure because there was no investigation done. But that's something that's rampant along all police forces. Suicide immediately stops an investigation.
Yes.
Why don't they should let it be something that they work towards trying to figure out, not something they just label.
Right. And as a result of that, they'll end an investigation on undetermined cases too, unfortunately. So, one of my D.C. trips, I went and visited my senator to provide her with a list of cases where there was, forensic evidence to back up the family's concerns that it was a homicide as opposed to a suicide. And because I'm someone who likes to come in with solutions, I suggested that the Army especially and the Air Force come up with some sort of a cold case squad that can go back and look at these cases with a fresh set of eyes and maybe give justice for the soldier that lost their life, and also to the parents whose minds are spinning with, not being able to find the answers that they need when they just lost a loved one.
And they get they get steamrolled and blocked out by the government system. And that I understand. But when you know that that's going to be something an obstacle they're going to have to get by, you should go out of your way to make everything else easier for them. because they're
Yes.
going to be steamrolled and blocked by the government system of investigation to begin with. So why are you making it just even worse on them by just throwing a moniker of suicide? I'm not saying the suicides aren't happening. I'm just saying that we should do a better job of looking, because at least 3 or 4 of these cases that you're looking into, to me, I don't even need to go and investigate. They're not suicides.
Exactly. And we know that too. We know that there's legitimate suicides happening. And, you know, but we did find that if it is a suicide, that it's not necessarily because they deployed over and over, that they were in combat. Not every single case is related to that. And those are the cases that we'd really like for people to look into. Like, why is it that a soldier's been on your base for, you know, not very long, or even a couple of years, and then they haven't even been overseas, but they commit suicide?
Well, I think those things have happened in the military for years. I think that they might just be brought to the forefront because they stick out now. They really stick out. Instead of the suicide sticking out, the lack of combat deployment sticks out. It's like, why is this? So people, I don't think, give enough credit to moral injury, survivor's guilt, guilt that gets spread into people who haven't deployed when they're in the military. Things like stolen valor come from somewhere, guys. And they come from a place of feeling not good enough with what you are and what you're doing. And that can guilt a soldier in the military. It can guilt them. I've seen it happen.
And imagine how that soldier who hasn't deployed feels like if they are struggling with a mental health issue that they didn't know they had before.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they never really had any issues, and then they're in the military and all of a sudden they realize, because it's a high stress environment, it's going to bring these kind of issues to the forefront. You know, they could just realize while they're serving that, oh, I didn't realize I had bipolar, but I don't want to tell anybody about it because I don't know what's going on. And then things spin out of control because they're not medicated, and that's not necessarily their fault. And what we'd like to see is
spoiler alert, I came down with depression in the military long time before the war ever kicked off. And I struggled with it for years, knowing I had it. And I never said anything for that reason. Now, for me, it wasn't a contributing factor to my PTSD, but if it was, I would have been really put in a hurt locker by not getting this treated long beforehand.
Same. I understand, Jeff. I'm so glad that, you know, the positive that came from losing my career was I could freely go and get help without any repercussions, any threats, anything.
Well, not just that, but we now have the opportunity to change the system and help people who are in that same situation who may or may not get the same outcome as we had. And that's why I do this stuff.
And that's why I do it too. What I'd like to do is catch these guys when it first hits, though, so we can turn their lives around instead of them just perpetually going downhill until they snap. And that way we can protect our investment, especially if they want to save their career. And we're not causing the taxpayer and more money and impacting the quality of life of people negatively.
Now, Jen, you say those phrases like you're trying to sell something. And that's a segue. That's a segue. You are going to Washington soon to talk in front of Congress. And again, you've done this before. And
yes,
talk about what the message is going to be and what you're bringing with you to bring some awareness to this problem with violence and murder and suicide that we have in our military right now.
Well, I think the Fort Hood situation is a good example and a microcosm of the problems at large. Because
it's a country, it's a nation issue, but the military is just a smaller portion of that, and therefore magnifies issues far beyond.
Yes, exactly, because it's within a community, so it's more easily trackable too than if you tried to track for the entire nation.
Right.
Because my biggest concern is about our soldiers and how we can save lives. So that's the message that I'm going to take when I go to D.C., using the Fort Hood situation as an example to show this is just a microcosm of some of the problems that have occurred since January 2016. I want to talk about a couple in particular to give you an example that even if this was all suicide, this isn't okay. Why have we lost, 22 off post and 13 on post to what they are saying is a suspected suicide? And why aren't they addressing it and letting the public know that they are really concerned about it too?
I don't know if the number's 22 a day, but you'd think they would already be out there concerned that 22 people a day are taking their lives.
You would think, right?
Yeah, you would expect. I would expect that. But all they do is leave it up to the nonprofit organizations, to the veterans to say something. I'm sorry, but the government's job, and I don't mean to get on the government, but I'm going to do it in this instance. Your job is to protect the people of the United States. And
That's
to protect,
right.
And you have to use a military to do that. You cannot have a military filled with 22 suicides a day and be effective. It creates mental health, and esprit de corps goes down the tubes. Guys start worrying about whether or not they're going to be taken care of. Guys start worrying about whether or not what they're doing is damaging themselves mentally for long term. We need to address this now as if it's a emergency, because guess what, guys? It's an emergency. You can argue all you want up in Washington about who's on what side of the aisle, but the bottom line is, if the North Koreans and the Russians came marching in, the people that you need to rely on are these people that you're just leaving out there.
Exactly, Jeff. I love how you said that, because that's what my concern is, okay, they suspect that 35 soldiers at Fort Hood committed suicide. That alone is going to have significant impacts on the soldiers around them, and it has. We've heard from the family members themselves on this post who have commented that, there's no way my kids committed suicide. Or, I know he didn't commit suicide because of A, B, and C, and what he just said to me and the future plans that they had. So, the manner of death does matter, because we're going to have to take different approaches with it.
Because if the manner of death is accident, and we've got a bunch of people not driving cars correctly, we need to address training on how to drive cars. If it's suicide and we're having a failure to identify and self-refer yourself to get help and call buddies up, we need to address that. If we have a magnitude of gang violence starting to build up around, and listen, guys, I live at Fort Bragg. I know very well what gang violence, 1990s, early Fort Bragg, can do to the command culture and the command climate at a post. You cannot make it go away. I'm saying something that she didn't even bring up, but the people at Hood are hearing me. If there is a massive rise in gang violence, and you are writing off gang-affiliated murders with suicide to just get it out of your hair, you are wrong, and you need to check yourself. And that's why I'm 100% behind you going to Washington, because there's too many warriors and heroes out there, male and female, who are being dishonored, and not and that's the thing. I don't see why you would do it. The only thing I can the only reason I can come up with is to get it out of your queue of cases, and it's an easy throw off to just say suicide, because it's a common thing now, and that is just lazy. It's dishonorable, and it's going to make things worse, and it has made things worse.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought up the gang violence issue, because we don't really know, what specifically is going on with the cases that may be homicides.
Yes. Spoiler alert, that was my interpretation, not the actual facts.
Right, but I think you're heading in the right direction with that, because we did do research and found that there is a lot of gang violence in the Texas area alone. MS-13 is one of the biggest.
They are the second biggest dangerous gang in the world, being only the first, only second into the U.S. military.
Yes, and so we don't have answers for why homicides might be occurring in the numbers that they are, but we don't want to discount that could be it, because, we're privy to information that the public's not going to be privy to, because we want to protect the integrity of the cases. But if you knew the manner of deaths that have occurred just on that base alone, you two would be like, okay, this is ruthless. This is brutal.
Go to Netflix, pull up the show Gangland, pull up a show on MS-13, and then when they talk about the ways they kill and what they're doing, apply that scene to a soldier in a car, and then tell me that that's suicide. And that's all you need to know. That tells you everything without telling you anything. You can go out and figure it out on your own. But that's why it's pretty obvious what might be going on. And that doesn't. What kills me about it is if it's MS-13, it's an outside element coming into an area. For example, let's say it's something like that. But also, you have to admit that there may be members of that gang that have joined the military. And that is not a secret. We are notorious for letting gang members into the military. We've done it for years. It's been a method of getting them to rehab. It's been a method of not doing a good enough job background search. Whatever reasons, the military attracts the people that come from that kind of background. What if those guys are now inside and they haven't let go of their ties and they're bringing their gang problems and their gang violence to a army that is already coming out of 2 wars with massive violence exposure? It's a disaster waiting to happen, and it's going to come to a head. It's not going to be Colonel or Major Hassan going in and shooting up a bunch of guys at the aid clinic. It's going to be one of these guys backed into a corner and doing the only thing they know how to do and shooting up people for no reason at all, which is, again, a microcosm of the world we live in right now with all the different shootings that go on.
Yes.
So it's dangerous, and we got to get a handle on it now. And what you're doing and going up there to Washington with, what date are you doing going up there to talk to them?
It looks like I'm going to be there on December 12th, and I've been given a 15-minute time slot to try and squeeze these issues into.
I'm going to do it, and I'm going to put out that she did not know I was going to ask this question. Who are you meeting with?
We're actually going to be presenting at the Rayburn building, which is where the House of Representative offices are. We've invited quite a few people to attend, and if they don't attend, we're going to go knocking on their doors afterwards.
Well, I mean, and if they don't attend, there's no excuse, because I'm going to get the list of names from you, and I'm going to put them on the show notes page of all the ones that have been invited. Now, I understand they all can't come, but if you're not there and you're part of the problem, then come on, guys. Come on, Congress. House of Representatives, Congress, you guys have been, for a couple of years now, you've been just fighting with each other, and now it's time to start doing some work.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be putting all the work into this. You are. There should be investigators from CID, investigators from the local law enforcement being allowed to be brought in. The FBI should be doing what you're doing. You're doing FBI level forensic and metric investigations that you shouldn't have to be doing.
I know. I'm doing it for them because they're not doing it, and they should be doing this.
Right. And
you're right.
You were an MP, right?
No,
you weren't. I wasn't an MP, yet you and me are here talking like seasoned investigators, and the MPs are not doing their jobs.
Right, and it's like you kind of can't argue with the evidence. Evidence is evidence. And so when a parent knows what the so-called evidence is in the autopsy, yet they've got a bunch of people trying to tell them that it's a suicide, when it's like there's no way that could have been a suicide.
And that brings me up to the one case I wanted to actually talk about, because we can give people a place to go look at it. She's one of the ones she's the one that got you looking into this stuff, and I have only found out about this case recently from another podcast. A little shout out to the guys over at Generation Y who did a very good episode on this case and agree with what we're about to say. Talk about the girl overseas whose parents were told was committed suicide and was obviously murdered and dragged and staged.
That was one of the first cases that I learned about. Lavina Johnson, she was U.S. Army, and I think it was in 2005 that her parents were informed that she committed suicide.
A week before she was flying home, all excited about Christmas.
Yes, exactly like this other case I was trying to tell you about with Paige Briles at Fort Hood. I mean, the patterns are what's so uncanny here. But yes, they told the parents suicide. They knew she wasn't suicidal because she's a happy kid. She was coming home. Not to say that some parents don't get in denial, but, the proof that they had would lead
No.
one to believe that this was
the
a
hard
happy
evidence
kid.
shows that she was optimistic about coming home. She was a little
Yes!
down. She was a little down about being treated differently as a female in a unit, but tell me that is not something that every woman that's ever served in the military has to deal with. And opening up to your parents about that does not make you a depressed, suicidal person. It makes you a human being dealing with white male privilege. As much as we're not always at fault, there is white male privilege, and women do get treated differently. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean she was suicidal because she got treated differently than the boys. That's just the situation.
Right.
But when you get told that she committed suicide by blowing her brains, and I hate to become graphic, but you have to understand that she shot herself in her head with her M16 and then threw the M16 across the room behind a bed, walked around the room, dragging bloods, walked outside, dragging herself around, and then came inside and died. Oh, by the way, with 2 gunshot wounds to her head, one of them wasn't even in her from the, like in an area that could have happened from holding the M16.
Right.
That's a suicide.
And I hate to get even more graphic, but the parents have, been kicking and screaming ever since to find the truth, and still haven't gotten any validation from the Army. They learned that when her body came home,
clear signs of sexual assault, and sexual mutilation.
And that someone poured acid on her genital areas, which were virtually gone, so a forensic test couldn't be done to determine that who had raped her.
Now,
because
guys,
the DNA would have been present.
Right. And guys, just so you know that this isn't something that podcasters and Jennifer have come up with on our own. The reason why the parents have a real legitimate argument is because an investigator and a person that worked for the autopsy office in Kandahar came to them and told them, this is bunk. She was killed. Now, they never put out who that was. And that person took a very big chance, and I applaud them for giving the autopsy in its official raw form to the parents, which the military didn't know happened. I also applaud them for having the guts to do it openly, which they did. So, bravo, because you really did bring a family a little bit of closure to a confusing situation. Now they have to deal with the confusing situation of not being treated as it should, because like you said, the biggest crime is, after all this, is not that you misidentify what killed them. The fact that somebody's responsible for it, and they're walking free. A murderer is walking free.
Free. Just got away with it.
Which means if you get away with it one time, I tell you what, I stole a piece of candy from a store when I was a little kid, and it was not the last time I did it. I didn't stop till I got caught. But every time you get away with things, you learn that you can get away with them.
Well, and we see that in the MO of perpetrators or predators, whatever you want to call them these days, that they do escalate. They get more brazen over time. So it's not like this guy's just going to rape and kill Lavina and stop.
Right.
He might stop for a little while, and then once he feels safe again, he'll do it again.
Right, and then once they start to feel invincible, they'll be doing it all the time.
Yes, could be a serial killer in the making.
Right.
We don't know.
That's exactly what it ends up being. And
yes.
So there was one thing I had it in my head now, and my late in the afternoon on a Saturday with it's raining outside, my TBI kicks in, and I forget the question I was going to ask. Okay. So I'm going to ask the tough question because I have to, so that we can get the right answer out. You are not a former law enforcement, no experience other than going to school to learn how to do investigation, so you don't have a long drawn out. I'm the same way. Having said that, though, have you brought in any experts to look at your numbers and to be able to write off the correlation versus causation argument that is eventually going to come?
Not yet, because we're just in the beginning phases of pulling the information together. Initially, everything was focused on sexual assault and rape. And yes, those are issues, but we have more issues than that speak to give us the big picture. Now, some families have brought in outside experts, but remember,
they're the families, yeah. So guys, if you're out there and you know of someone that is an expert in this kind of investigation, or if you are an expert in this kind of investigation and you want to get in touch with me, I will get you into. Now, you've got to be an expert, guys. I do not want all you damn weekend friggin' web sleuths coming to me and send me all the information, because this stuff's sensitive. But if you can legitimately show that you are a long-term investigations expert that would hold up in a court of law, and you want to get in touch with me to take a look at this stuff and see if she's on the right, because I believe she's on the right. But I also know correlation and causation, when you're looking at studies like this, is always going to be an argument that is worth it if you don't have anybody verifying your work. So my gift to you is going to be opening it up to my audience. If they know someone or if they are that person, contact me via my email and be prepared to prove how you're an expert. If you're working at McDonald's and you were an E5 in the Army in infantry, you're not that guy. I'm just letting you know that. You're not going to get your hands on this information. You better be someone that's names can be Googled. But yeah, we'll get you somebody that's going to help you get some clout around this.
That's a good point, too, because that's exactly why I put the information out there. I don't make assumptions. I just put the facts out there so that others can make their own assessments of they think what's going on. And even when we know something might be suspected a homicide, we don't even put that on there because, the only people that know that it could be a homicide are the parents and they're...
Or the person that killed them.
Yes, and we want to protect the integrity of cases. So you're not going to see me saying without someone's permission, like in the case of Paige Briles, where they wanted me to let you know it was initially ruled a homicide, but then in the end ruled a suicide.
Let me ask you a question, if we can get into it. Was she ruled a homicide by local or by military investigators?
This is the sad part. The person that is suspected was a military member, and they let the person...
They have a suspect.
No, they didn't. The parents did.
Okay.
They tried to tell the military that they suspected this person because of A, B, and C, and felt like they weren't listened to. I mean, Jeff, they're telling these guys to FOIA things if they want the results of the investigations. That's how much they stonewall them.
That's horrible. Because, guys, FOIA is a great act. But we all know that FOIA is so that they can redact and drag you and make you forget that you asked for it. It takes the average time it takes for you to get a FOIA document of a document that is not archived, mind you. Now, not archived means it's a computer stroke away from getting it and sending it to you. The average time is a year. For archived information, the average time is 2 years. And if it's archived and it's not inside a military internet system, it is charged to you at an exorbitantly high amount of money. I'm talking like $30,000 a document for someone to send a private into a back room and find a document. Never in the history of military has a private ever done $30,000 worth of work.
These guys are traumatized.
Right.
Like they want to do a FOIA.
FOIA, yeah. Because
so
they're going to redact the shit out of it and send me a redacted document. And then I'm going to have no more information than I had before I paid $25 for a FOIA document.
Exactly, Jeff. And the reason that I'm highlighting the soldiers that have died is, A, I'm trying to honor them because I don't want them forgotten. I'm trying to put them together so that their voices speak in unison. And you can't really argue with the fact that they're gone. They've died. So whether it's a suicide or a homicide, it's important.
Closure is important because if it's not just suicide, then there's an issue that needs to be addressed. And that's really the reason why we're pushing this. If there's another thing out there that's happening right now, if there's something missing that they're missing or we're missing, then we need to know it because we can't fix it if we don't know about it. And if we just completely ignore a problem, that problem is going to swim right up and bite us in the ass in a big way. I don't know if you guys remember this time called 9/11. Big problem that we ignored, and it finally came and bit us in the ass. And that's an extreme example.
Yes,
good
and
Lord,
there's co-occurring problems.
Yeah, big gangs like MS-13 are damn near militaries themselves. So the fact that word is even thrown around in this should get people involved. There should be FBI and DEA and ATF should be involved in this. They should be coming in and seizing the documents and taking a look at it. I'm saying that. That's my opinion. And
I did report this situation to the FBI, to the DOD IG, to the Army IG, to whoever I could think of that would look at it big picture and see if they can't wrap their hands around what's going on. And also, to bring attention to the fact that it could be something like gang violence, and that's what I even suggested, based on what we've learned from the parents and the autopsies. And it's not that I'm trying to come up with a reason why this is happening. It's just that I don't feel that it's fair to just go ahead and blame the chain of command for what might be an underbelly of issues in the enlisted they have no idea about. I'm just not one for saying, oh, this commander should go down because this is the way it is.
You blame local chain of command for an institutional issue.
Right.
That's not even unfair. That is just outright wrong and dishonorable.
And it happens, and I don't want that happening to Fort Hood or any of these bases, because it's not one person's fault, one commander. We just got some issues that need to be looked at, addressed, find the answers why, so we can save lives.
Well said. Jennifer Norris, tell us the website that everyone can go to and read up on all this good work you've been doing.
My website's called Military Justice for All, and it's www.militaryjusticeforall.com. And this is just the place that I've started to collect the research in an effort that, hoping that media and other people would take a look at it and try and pull things big picture. The case with the shooter, what's his name, Devin Kelly, the church shooter in Texas. That's not the first time we've seen things like that. We had it happen with Micah Johnson, with the 5 Dallas police officers. So these issues are starting to bleed out into the communities too, and impact our communities.
And even if it wasn't, guys, try to think of an organization whose sole purpose is to defend and secure the freedoms of the United States that is internally struggling with violence issues and undisclosed investigations and when they deal with things of national security level interests, if you cannot trust them, and I said it, if you cannot trust them to work a standard murder or suicide, a death investigation accurately, how the hell are you going to be able to say that you can trust them with the security of the United States?
Exactly.
That's what it comes down to, guys. You're blowing up your own credibility by blowing this under the carpet, and you're dishonoring the people who volunteer and sacrifice their lives to serve.
And I'd like to say in closing, too, that, when we see this stuff, what looks like being swept under the rug or ignored, but then we see all these cases out in the public where a man's being accused of this or accused of that, and it's blasted in the papers before we even know what the truth is. We now have concerns about, okay, this looks like a false allegation. So you're going to falsely accuse this guy over here of A, B, and C, but you're not going to look at Lavina Johnson's case and find out what the truth of it because someone's died?
Yeah, funny story, guys. When I first reached out to Jennifer, it was on Twitter, and I've been following her for a long time because I kind of liked what she was doing. And I reached out to her and asked her, I said, hey, would you like to come on and talk about what you've been working on and the stuff you've been doing? And I got sternly told, as long as I didn't have to come on and talk about how women are abused sexually by men, blah, blah, blah. And I never expected or heard that. Now, I totally understood it. And that is a little bit of a teaser because I'm going to bring her back on. Guys, I like having Jennifer on so much that I'm thinking about having her on all the time because there's an investigation right now that's going on. There was a Green Beret that was killed or died in Africa. And right now, I don't want to bring it up because it's too soon into it. I want to wait and see how things fold out. But also, I will say that Jennifer Norris is a military justice program analyst, and that makes her an authority on military justice. And so therefore, I want to start bringing her on like once a month maybe to talk about stuff that's going on, talk about updates as to what you're doing. But I want to save that for next time because we can do a whole show on that whole conversation. We and her had a phone call the other day that was intended to be 15 minutes long, and it was an hour and a half drive home from work that we went into all this stuff we're talking about. So we could throw it all at you now, or we can make you focus on this, and then we'll come back. I think should we come back and talk about that at its own episode? I think that'd be a good idea. That way we don't want to overload. I mean, it's a lot for people to take in. Anyone who's not heard any of this stuff, this is a lot to take in. To even consider that this is going on is life-altering to some people, especially guys who make their careers or make their efforts right now to try to stop suicides, to realize that they may be getting numbers that are skewed or just outright false. And that's not fair to the to what it makes the mental health of the soldiers look like. PTSD didn't just start up this war, guys. It's been around forever. All right, that's a bottom line. So we don't have an epidemic of mental health. We just have an epidemic of not dealing with it right.
Right. Thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate your kind words. It means a lot to me.
Oh, it's not kind. I'm fired up, Jennifer. It's only kind because I agree with you, but I'm fired up. I will not let. I was a Green Beret and a senior NCO. I will not let them get away with doing something wrong because that's not the person they taught me to be. And that's honest to God the whole reason why. You taught me to be better, and so therefore I'm going to hold you to the same standards that you taught me to hold my soldiers in my life into. I do everything right in my life because I stick to those standards. You need to do them.
It's called integrity.
Right. And I know that it's hard when you're in the military to stand up and say something, but it is not hard to send an email to Jeff Adamek and tell me about some things and let me rant and rave about it, because I'm not going to overstep my bounds, but I'm definitely going to make people uncomfortable. And sometimes comfort is all you need to step into to get them to act. And
Jeff, the funny thing is when I started this journey, I never thought it would lead me to this. I had no idea this many people were dying.
Well, again, that's if I didn't know better, I would write this all off as conspiracy. But the evidence is the evidence. There's something going on here.
Right. And I'm not here to theorize what's going on. We know it's systemic.
That's what I'm here to do.
I don't want to blame anyone.
I'm here to theorize and blame. You're here to give out stuff. That's why I am not a analyst. I am giving my opinion, and I'll be the one that gives my raw, unfiltered opinion. But I'll give it only where I've got evidence, and there's plenty of it here.
Yep.
So, Jennifer, real quick, one more time before we go ahead and give out your social media places where people can come and follow you so we can bump up those follow numbers on Twitter and Facebook.
I'm at Twitter at JSN2007, Juliet Sierra November 2007. And that's really where I do the majority of my work. I call myself a military crime historian, so that's where I collect all the stories of the current events that are going on, and then later go back and add them to the website, militaryjusticeforall.com, and put them together so people can get a look at the bigger picture.
Well, thank you for coming on, Jennifer. I'm glad you took time out of your Saturday to wait a half hour for me. Guys, I was late. I can't lie. I was late. I was sitting having a long conversation with my son about the New York Giants and how Eli Manning's getting done wrong. And my wife comes and goes, "Aren't you supposed to be doing an interview right now?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I am." But the boy only comes back from college once in a while. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for all the work you're doing. And thank you for bringing light to this stuff. And we're going to change some things here. I'm going to give you all the assistance I can give you. And we're going to make people uncomfortable and get them to change.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me. I appreciate you looking at the real issues.
Yes, and next week I will be looking at the issue of whether or not sprinkles should be rainbowed or chocolate on vanilla ice cream. That's a joke about you saying the real issues, because I did an episode on Halloween where I talked about Bigfoot. I mean, I do talk about real issues, but come on, I'm a Green Beret. I don't always follow the rules. But this is important to me, so that's why it's on here. But thank you once more again. And guys, remember that you are only going to be able to accomplish the things that you believe you can accomplish. Nobody else has any control over your life except for you. Do not put yourself in a cage of oppression by doubting yourself. Free the oppressed. The oppressed will be there. We will see you guys next week.